Welcome everybody to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor. In today's episode, we will be discussing episode 8 of this first season of House of the Dragon, called The Lord of the Tides. This episode directed by Geeta Vasant Patel, I believe, and a very eventful episode it is. Later this week, also check in, we will continue to cover The Patient, the Hulu serial killer thriller, which is also approaching its finale. Remember to subscribe so you know when all these episodes become available. We'll also have later this week, hopefully, if everybody's schedules line up, we'll be discussing the state of affairs with Disney's handling of the Marvel and Star Wars franchises, catching up on Andor, a show we may be covering in more detail as it continues, as well as the finale of this controversial season of She-Hulk, and also the very entertaining Werewolf by Night Halloween special that came out just this past weekend. If you have any feedback, please reach out to us, needsomintroduction@gmail.com. Drop us a review. It helps others find our podcast. And of course, most important of all, share us with your friends and family if you think they'll appreciate the conversation. Search through our backlog to see other shows we've covered in the past. Maybe you're catching up on Succession or Severance or Better Call Saul, just to name a few of the shows we've covered here in the past. So I'll be breaking down this episode by myself, and then bringing in my sister for a conversation about some of the big themes and some of the big events that happened in this very eventful episode of television.
Princess Rhaenyra and Prince Daemon. It's been so long since we were granted the joy of your presence.
Indeed, Your Grace.
They're not long enough to merit a greeting upon our arrival.
I'm sure the Queen had pressing business, my love. What can either of us know of ruling a kingdom?
I do not rule, as you well know. My father and I are mere stewards of the king's will and wisdom.
And how exactly is that wisdom expressed? In blinks and wheezes? I'd be surprised if he could remember his own name, or if you could.
King Viserys' condition has worsened since you saw him last. It subjects him to considerable pain on the advice of the maesters.
The maesters, of course. It is they who keep him addled on milk of the poppy while the High Towers warm his throne.
Rhaenyra, if you would see him without it, almost blind with suffering.
No. Excellent. I have no doubt it was an act of the purest mercy, but tell me, for the king's suffering, did the maesters also prescribe the removal of Targaryen heraldry and the installation in its stead of various statues and stars?
The emblems of the Seven serve only to guide us on an uncertain path, to remind us of a higher authority.
And on the morrow, which authority will sit in judgment of my son's claim on his own inheritance?
That would be mine. And the hands. But be assured the father is just and commands me to forget the accusations you have held in this room today.
So we start things off. We're in Driftmark. It's been at least 6 years since we find out that Corlys has been out to sea and he's been injured. He has sea fever, some kind of fever, and he may not survive this, which of course raises the question of succession to the Driftwood throne. The Driftwood throne, by the way, legitimately made out of driftwood. Vaemond, Corlys' brother, believes that he should be the successor because he is a true Valyrian and has true Valyrian blood. Because we all know that Rhaenyra's kids are not Valyrian. But Rhaenys pushes for the king's wishes, which remain to have his grandson ascend to the throne, and it's the only card she has to play. If she loses Corlys, she has no one on her side anymore, and strangely has to weigh aligning herself with Rhaenyra, potentially the murderer of her son. And Rhaenys also mentions the fact that the king has a soft spot for Rhaenyra.
The matter has been decided.
By a man whose ambition has brought down on us calamity after calamity. My brother cares only for the history books. But what of the Valyrian line? Is it to be snuffed out? Supplanted by the pups of House Strong? Driftmark is mine, by all rights. And while I should like your support, I do not need it. The winds have shifted. The crown has good reason to take my side.
My cousin the king would have your tongue for this.
But it's not a king who sits the Iron Throne these days, good sister. It's a queen.
From there we go to a beautiful shot of a tiny figure descending into a dragon cave, and that's Daemon, who is retrieving three new eggs, count them, to add to their brood of dragons. And that's when he receives his raven couriered message that they are to return to King's Landing because there is going to be a conversation once again about the succession. Apparently they could not wait for 3 days for Corlys to show up. That was approximately what Rhaenys had anticipated based on the distance of the previous raven they had received. But when you think about the logistics of this, I mean, it takes at least a day to pack. This doesn't all happen in a few minutes. You don't just pull up your orbits and book a flight to King's Landing. Although I guess you could do it on Dragonback, possibly. But they're going by sea, of course. They're Valerians. So it's almost like these ships are passing each other. Corlys' ship is coming in as they're exiting. Regardless, they are on their way. Daemon brings the news to Rhaenyra, who's with Luke, I believe, at this point, who's getting his High Valyrian language lessons, and he can't get that pronunciation quite right. So confusing, felled and killed, and everybody is off to King's Landing. We first see Rhaenyra, Daemon, and their entourage arrive to crickets and wind sounds. No one is there to greet them. This is pretty petty, but still understandable considering the animosity there between these families. They notice the castle has been remodeled. There is much less pornographic Targaryen tapestries and many more 7-pointed stars. We know Alicent has these religious beliefs, the High Towers in general. We go all the way back to, I believe, the second or third episode where Rhaenyra actually prays with her after her mom's death. And the High Towers have gone whole hog, redecorating everything around here, putting 7-pointed stars on everything. And of course, this speaks a lot to the influence they have here, of course. And of course, it is also the design style we will see in Game of Thrones, the original recipe Game of Thrones show, which has its origins probably right here. Alicent leaves her boring High Council meeting, yet another High Council meeting. There's less of them as this show progresses, though, to meet with Rhaenyra and Daemon, R&D. And she's intercepted by Eric. Not Eric, Eric. Get these names right. You know, I can't get these names right. They all sound the same to me. I understand, Alicent. I appreciate where you're coming from. She gets the horrible news that Aegon has been at it again and has raped his housekeeper/nanny. And this is a really powerful scene here with Olivia Cook, where she's being sympathetic to this girl, but she is so morally compromised at this point. She starts with this sympathy, but then says, but, you know, I can give you a little bit of gold. People might say things like, maybe you brought this on yourself. Maybe you're trying to get attention for yourself.
I know it wasn't your fault. I believe you. You do? I do. But what I worry about is what others might believe. You were alone with the prince, were you not?
Yes.
And no one else saw what happened between the two of you? If anyone else were to hear about this.
I haven't told anyone.
You told Sir Eric, and Talia, and now me. And though I believe you were not to blame, others might not be so trusting. They might think you're trying to besmirch the prince, or worse, that you're the sort of girl that might have enticed him in the first place. And you know what happens to girls like that.
I wasn't dreaming or anything, another word to anyone. You're right. It's right all my life.
I know you won't.
This really echoes a lot of what happened during the whole Me Too movement, where after the fact, it was discovered that a lot of these serial abusers were protected by people who were outspoken feminist firebrands, for example, and meanwhile were counseling these predators and simultaneously meeting with the victims and shutting down those stories. So there's a little shades of that there, some current events being shaded into the story. But more importantly, just shows the moral compromise when you think about Alicent's very pure and absolute moral code early in the show. Power corrupts, and here we see it in effect. And of course, the stinger on this scene where she provides the abortive tea echoes all the way back to all of the judgment that she rained down on Rhaenyra, and here she is facilitating the same. But she sincerely is upset about this situation, that she has been so thoroughly compromised. And she goes and calls out Aegon, smacks him around even. She tells him, you are no son of mine. Think about the queen. Think about me. Think about your wife. Think about how badly this reflects on all of us. By the way, his wife is his sister. Once again, another one of these crazy time jumps and one of these things that gets just tangentially transmitted to the audience, strangely, that he's married to Helena, his prophetess sister, and they have kids. This poor girl was actually supposed to be getting the kids ready for the event. Another interesting scene happens here. Many interesting scenes in this episode in general. Viserys is ever worse, and Daemon and Rhaenyra go to visit him. Daemon can't even look at her. Daemon can't even look at his brother. He feels so bad about this condition he's found himself in. And there's maybe some shame here too, when they mention the fact that the Triarchy are resurgent, to which even Viserys is like, didn't we win that war years ago? And Daemon's kind of like, well, maybe we didn't win it. Maybe we kind of took our eyes off the ball there for a little bit. But they're buttering up Grandpa as much as possible. We have another Aegon and another Viserys. That's right. Daemon has completely overcome his erectile dysfunction, and he is now popping out babies left and right. He had some with his previous bride. He's got 2 with Rhaenyra, and there's another one. There's another bun in the oven. These are ultra Targaryens, aka they probably have genetic defects, TBD. But not as many as Helena and Aegon's kids are going to have. The inbreeding is strong with those. Also love at this scene that Viserys, in all his pain, he asks for more of his tea, the tea of the poppy. And I love Daemon's face, smelling it, looking at it, showing it to Rhaenyra. What's going on in this little tea over here? Matt Smith just hilarious in this whole thing. And maybe this is the funniest episode we've had, intentionally or unintentionally, of this show. Luke and Jace have returned to the training court. Everybody's looking at them. Of course, there's been rumors swirling for years now. And we see that Aemond, one-eyed Aemond, is sparring with Sir Criston and actually gets the better of him. This really impresses everybody, of course. This guy has really got his swagger on since he got that dragon. Lost an eye. You know, you lose an eye, but you get all that swagger. I think the trade-off is not so bad. Plus, you look pretty badass with the eye patch on. I gotta tell you, overall, this is a win. We get an important scene between Rhaenys and Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra's still using all her soft skills. She's brought Rhaenys' granddaughter, of course, Rhaena. And Rhaenyra does her thing where she tells her the truth and lies to her at the exact same time. Says, I loved your son. She did. Loved him and respected him in her own way. And didn't kill him. Didn't kill Laenor. Once again, true. He lives. She doesn't know that, but cold comfort for the mom. And also makes a very nice political offer here. Hey, let's marry these cousins off to each other. And all of a sudden, your bloodline now, you're close to the king. Your children will sit the throne someday. This looks like a win for everybody.
I loved your son. You may not believe it to be true, but I did. I did not order his death. Nor was I complicit in it, I swear this to you. I'll make you an offer. Back Luke's claim, and let us betroth Laena's children to mine. Baela will be queen of the 7 kingdoms, and her sons will be heirs to the throne. Rhaena will rule in Driftmark, and the seat will pass to her and Lucerys' children in time.
A generous offer. Or a desperate one.
What does it matter?
Rhaenys sees this for what it is. She says a great offer, a kind offer, or a desperate one, or both. And she drives home the point again that she'll be alone. Once Corlys is gone, her protection is gone. Depending on this decision today, she may have no allies. So this might be her best lifeline. We have another important conversation here between Viserys and Rhaenyra. Interestingly, at first he confuses, this is important by the way, he confuses Rhaenyra and calls her Alicent. Last week, he called Alicent Emma as he was leaving that patio to get his early sleep time in. Alicent is there to beg for him to somehow intercede in the proceedings. She realizes now that she really doesn't want this thing that's been given to her. She thought she did. She doesn't want it anymore. But now she's trapped by it. And she tells her dad, if you really believe in the prophecy of Aegon, you really think I'm the one to shepherd this land, you got to help me. You got to do something. And this moves Viserys. Viserys says, my only child to Rhaenyra. Ouch. To all those other kids. Then again, those 2 sons of his are sons of bitches, I got to tell you. And I don't really have much of a read on Helena yet, so can't say much on her behalf. But boy, the 2 boys, not so great. Might speak to their parentage here. Sometime after that, Viserys has to go to his daily amputations at the hands of the maesters. Fun for everybody. And tells Otto that he wants to have dinner. Otto just thinks he's demented at this point. He says, it's still morning. He's like, no, tonight, you idiot. I'm not that far gone. And of course, that leads to hearing the petitions for the ascendancy to the Driftwood throne. Otto's there, before the throne, says, "In this matter and in all matters, I speak the voice of the king."
My queen, my lord hand, the history of our noble houses extends beyond the Seven Kingdoms to the days of old Valyria. For as long as House Targaryen has ruled the skies, House Velaryon has ruled the seas. When the doom fell on Valyria, our houses became the last of their kind. Our forebears came to this new land knowing that were they to fail, it would mean the end to their bloodlines and their name. I have spent my entire life on Driftmark defending my brother's seat. I am Lord Corlys' closest kin, his own blood. The true, unimpeachable blood of House Velaryon runs through my veins.
As it does in my sons, the offspring of Laenor Velaryon. If you cared so much about your house's blood, Sir Vaemond, you would not be so bold as to supplant its rightful heir. No, you only speak for yourself and for your own ambition.
You'll have chance to make your own petition, Princess Rhaenyra. Do Sir Vaemond the courtesy of allowing his to be heard.
Vaemond makes his case and just alludes to the parentage of the heir to the throne. Rhaenyra interrupts him going, "So is my son's also Velaryon." And he doesn't come right out and say it. Maybe this is like kind of, she's trying to egg him on. Alicent puts her in her place. You'll have your turn to make your case. Let's not interrupt. Judge Judy puts a stop to all that. And then this is maybe the highlight or the low light of this episode. It's kind of hard to say. Kind of the show peaking and falling at the same moment. Just as Rhaenyra starts making her case, the doors open, and who should it be? The king. And the king's not being carried in. He wouldn't let that happen. He's making quite a show of this. Really a drama queen here. Viserys really knows how to turn on the volume here for the drama. And that's all he's got at this point. And he walks so slowly, so painstakingly. This is very funny, by the way. I found it very funny. He's got like a leper's mask on. A gold one, though. Very fancy. And this is just so protracted. But then it starts to, over the course of this effort that Patty Constantine is pouring into this performance, start to kind of win me over. And I guess maybe that's what this whole performance is about. Viserys, his intention. And as he's walking up the stairs, he drops his crown. Someone comes to assist. He thinks it's the knight again. He's like, I got this. But it's not. It's Daemon. Very sweet. Daemon picks up that crown and is like, come on. You got this. So he gets up there, gets on the throne. Otto steps aside. And he's like, are we having this conversation again? We have already decided this. We've already had this conversation. But you know who would have the most insight into Corlys's actual desires in this case would be his wife. What does my cousin Rhaenys have to say about all this? So now the ball is suddenly in her court. She thought she was completely powerless just a few scenes ago. She now can sway this decision. And she aligns herself with Rhaenyra and makes it public, the wedding plans, which of course now puts the onus on Rhaenyra to follow through. So she's making her moves here. Everyone's making some moves. And the king's like, great, this matter is settled. Again, he puts a little sauce on that word again. But Vaemond is going to have his say. He's going to be like, you know what? I've had just about enough of this. He starts skirting around the issue. He's going right at it. It's coming from side to side. Daemon's like, say it. Say the word bastard. And he does.
You break law and centuries of tradition to install your daughter as heir. Yet you dare tell me who deserves to inherit the name Velaryon? No. I will not allow it.
Allow it. Do not forget yourself, Vaemond.
That is no true Velaryon. And certainly no nephew of mine.
Go to your chambers. You have said enough.
Viserys is my true-born grandson. And you are no more than the second son of Driftmark.
You may run your house as you see fit, but you will not decide the future of mine. My house survived the doom, and 1,000 tribulations besides. And Gods be damned. I will not see it ended on the account of this.
Say it. Her children are bastards! And she is a whore.
The king says, I should have your tongue taken out for that. To which Damon goes, he can keep the tongue. I'll take the rest. Chops his head off. The top of his head, anyway. His tongue is lolling out there, just for a little added humor to this whole thing. Grotesque humor. After all of this, the king is not looking too good. He's looking a little green around the gills. And Otto goes, quick, tea of the puppy for the king. But the king says, no, I do not want to fog my mind. I must put things right. Still wants to put things right. Rhaenys goes to see the maesters about her brother-in-law's body. Says bad luck to see a dead body. She goes, I've seen so many of them at this point. What's another one? And the maesters are doing something here, preparing the body. They're cutting him open. Is this an autopsy? Is there a question? Was it a heart attack? I think we know how he died. And then we get to the dinner. This is a great scene, a really great scene. This episode's very uneven. There's some funny parts that I think weren't supposed to be funny. It's getting a little soap opera in some respects, especially with these time jumps. I feel disconnected from the characters sometimes, especially with these new actors. But this is a great scene. This dinner scene is really, really outstanding. And you see, at this moment anyway, Viserys at his absolute best. The one thing he has now is his pathetic situation. It's his, somehow, after all this time, preserved innocence. And somehow this works. This is, we will finally see in this moment that this has been his power in a way this whole entire time. That he's maintained peace in a lot of ways by being so naive. But maybe he's not actually that naive. This is his power. This is how he manipulates people. And he does it again. He goes full crypt keeper, drops off that mask and shows everybody his beautiful face with his missing eye and everything else. Right before dinner, everybody. Come on, Grandpa. Right before dinner? Come on. You think it's bad when he loses his dentures. Look at this. And he basically says, have some pity on me. Like, look at this. Just this pathetic old man. He's only in his 50s, by the way, according to the book. But life's been rough, really rough. Or this progressive disease has been.
But tonight, I wish you to see me as I am. Not just a king, but your father, your brother, your husband, and your grandsire, who may not, it seems, walk for much longer among you. Let us no longer hold ill feelings in our hearts. The crown cannot stand strong if the House of the Dragon remains divided. But set aside your grievances. If not for the sake of the crown, and for the sake of this old man, who loves you all so dearly.
And he says, for no other reason, if you cannot work things out amongst yourselves, just do it for me. Just for me as a person. And this seems to work. Rhaenyra toasts Alicent. Alicent toasts Rhaenyra. She'll make a good queen. And you see, for a moment here, these women looking at each other, remembering their childhood bond, wanting to rekindle. Can they somehow get back to that moment in their lives? The answer is no. And it's all because these younger generation, their antagonism from their youth is still percolating and it's still unresolved, to say the least. Aegon, right in front of his wife, is trying to make the moves on the next princess-to-be, Daemon's daughter. But Jace gets the better of this whole transaction by, first of all, winkingly complimenting him and teasing him a little bit, and then dancing with Helena. But things get even worse. When they bring out the boar, they place it in front of Aemond. And they all start snickering because they remember the whole pig joke. Remember the pig joke they made on him when he was younger? They should know better than snicker at this guy because he has turned into straight-on serial killer now. And he goes, hang on a second. I got one more toast for everybody else. A toast for my strong cousins. What a strong group of friends we have here. They are definitely, one thing you can definitely say about those guys, they are strong. And of course, they're all at each other's throats immediately again. And Daemon. Oh, you see, Daemon. You see how these names work on this show? Aemond is giving big Daemon energy here. Big Daemon energy. He's, by the way, much taller than his brother now. The younger brother has now shot past him. He's a better fighter. He's got the biggest dragon in the land. He's got big Daemon energy. but things get pretty much contained. Damon actually follows them out to make sure things don't kind of bleed out into the hallway or beyond. And Rhaenyra does still try to patch things up with Alicent. Alicent actually asks her to stay. And she goes, you know what? These kids, these crazy, crazy kids, I'm going to escort them home, make sure everything's all right over there. But I'll come back on Dragonback. And we can spend time together. And I can spend time with my dad. And Alicent, I think, honestly says, I'd like that. The king would like that. It'll be good. They know the king is not long for this world. So things are still mostly positive. Next thing we see, Mysaria, a.k.a. the White Worm, gets a visit from one of the servers at the dinner. And of course, that person, that server, is full of rumors. So of course, we've mentioned this before on the podcast, everybody in the general public knows exactly what the hell is going on among all of this drama internally, because somebody knows, one of the knights knows, one of the cooks knows, one of the maesters knows what's happening. They prepare a tea or someone delivers it, and that rumor goes up the food chain and eventually ends up in the hands of the purveyor of the rumors. And of course, that bleeds out into among the common folk as well. So everything's known. There's no mysteries as to what's going on, and I'm sure that's how it was in actual medieval time as well. There are spies everywhere. And then we get to our final scene. We saw Viserys at his best. Now we see Viserys at his worst. As I mentioned before, he's been confusing one woman for another. And now he's confused Alicent with Rhaenyra. He's flipped it over from before. And he's like, Rhaenyra, I need to finish that conversation I was having with you. Alicent's like, huh? What are you talking about? And he starts talking about the vision and how he does believe that she's the one to do this. And he mentions Aegon, which of course is his son's name. Also the person who saw this vision years ago, the king. And it's also his grandchild's name now as well. There's another Aegon. So confusing with all these Aegons. But she hears Aegon. And more importantly than that, she hears, it is you. You are the one. You must do this. Once again, he's talking to Rhaenyra, wrapping up the conversation from before. But who's hearing this? It's Alicent, because he's so high on poppy tea, or just in death throes. And she reads that as, I know what you're telling me. Our crazy ass son, Aegon, has got to be the king, and I'm the one who's got to make it happen. And then he breathes his last breath. We see, one more time, the blade with the prophecy written up. And as we cut to black, on his last breath, he says, my love. Who's my love? His daughter, I think. And that's the end of the episode. Next week, all hell breaks loose. And we'll just see how bad it gets. We only have 2 more episodes before the end of the season. And I do not think we're going to have a time jump. We're probably going to jump directly into the immediate aftermath of the death of the king. And of course, the beginning of the battle for the throne. So that is the plot breakdown. Now, I'm going to talk to Celia about what she thought of all this.
I'm sorry. What do you want it to do? If I believe it to be true.
Believe what to be true, my king?
Oh, don't you remember? Aegon.
Our son.
His dream. The Song of Ice and Fire. It is true. What he saw in the north. The prince that was promised.
I don't understand this house.
The prince.
Prince Aegon.
To unite the realm against the cold and the dark. It is you. You are the one. You must do this. You must do this.
I understand, my king.
Oh, no more. My love.
All right, Celia. So I broke down the episode before. I have a bunch of questions for you based on this episode. A very, very eventful episode. My first question, totally non-Game of Thrones related, was, did you see the trailer for The White Lotus? Did you see season 1 of The White Lotus?
No, and I saw the trailer for the new season, and I am so interested in the show now. I put it on my list, and I'll just binge watch it.
Yeah, Sona and I will be covering that next. That will be the next show we cover together. And it starts in 3 weeks, immediately after House of the Dragon wraps up. And that'll be our next show. But yeah, you should catch up on it. It just won a whole bunch of Emmy awards. It's a comedy question mark, but you'll see when you watch the show. It's definitely entertaining. And it was a show funny. We did not cover it originally. We were just talking about it here and there when we had the podcast, and it came out immediately after Mayor of Easttown. And I was trying to think of what show am I going to cover next. And we really should have done White Lotus because it came out. It did like nobody watched it. It was a total flop. And I'm like, boy, man, we really dodged a bullet because we could have been talking about that and no one's watching it. And then by the time it ended its run after 7 weeks, it was a huge phenomenon. So I was like, damn it, we missed it. Anyway, it took off and won a bunch of Emmys. And I'm sure this season will be huge. What else? Did you hear the conversation online last week about that episode? We talked about how much we liked the look of the episode, this day for night look, and everybody's just like, I can't see anything, it's too dark. And just like that was the internet reaction, was that everybody was just complaining, and critics too. Critics were complaining too, like they couldn't see anything. And I'm like, I don't know, like I did not have problems with this. Where I did agree, by the way, there were a lot of people who complained about that like episode at the end of Game of Thrones in the final season where it was the Army of the Dead showed up. And that was like black on black on black. I was like, I literally had to rewind and just kind of squint and be like, I think I know what's happening.
Yeah.
I did not have the experience this time with this one, which I found ironic that people were complaining so much
No,
about.
I liked that aspect of it, actually. Yeah. I liked that it looked like they were in natural light as the day was dimming. It's exactly what everyone is not liking.
Well, I think what people were complaining about, and it was not my experience, by the way, was that I guess, depending on the contrast on your TV, and this does happen sometimes, like different screens have different appearances, that the characters were basically just silhouettes because, you had that lighter sky and then they were so dark that they were just silhouettes on the screen and you couldn't even see their faces basically, right? But that was not my experience. I could see them clearly. So
in this case, it just depends what your TV is able to do for you.
Well, I think that's across the board. I think that episode, by the way, some of those Game of Thrones episodes, the big ones, were available. They would be simulcast in movie theaters the day that they premiered. So I think that night episode I was talking about was actually playing like on IMAX. And I think if you saw it on an IMAX screen, it probably looked great. But watching it at home, I couldn't see anything that was happening. So
we have a TV that does that, what everyone's complaining about, which is why I'm thinking, is it the TV?
Yeah, I think so.
That we put in Andrew's room and bought some really expensive thing on sale. Of course, had to be on sale, but I could see every detail of everything that happens in that scene, like we're in a movie theater. So for me, it was great. But if I was watching it on the TV that we took to Andrew's room, where everything looks great except for really dim scenes, I would have maybe had the same feeling about it.
I'd also tell people to turn off those auto settings. Like your TV has auto settings, for example, if the room is bright, if there's like sunlight, it automatically adjusts itself. If there's a lot of contrast on the screen, it'll automatically adjust. I would recommend that people turn all those automatic settings off and just watch this darkest scene of a movie or something and just play with the buttons till you get the look you want and leave it. Don't turn the auto settings back.
Yeah, it's a shame because this series requires almost very good TVs to appreciate how amazing it is. In this episode that we're going to discuss, Damon, between it looks like two rocks,
yes,
they're mountains.
Yep.
And if you're not paying attention, it just looks like these two mountains, but you see that there is a person in there climbing down to go get the eggs, the dragon eggs. We don't realize that's what he's doing yet.
Yep.
The scene itself is like a poem.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I agree. I took a note of that as well. I love that they're showing the scale of this world. It's something that they do really well that I think people get wrong over and over again. I'm just forcing myself to watch that Lord of the Rings show. And some of the design work is really beautiful on it, but it all just feels so manufactured or, computer generated. It just feels so artificial, I should say. Right. And it does look huge. There's some really beautiful vistas and stuff, but it still feels so artificial. Whereas I think that's what I've always liked about Game of Thrones. There's dragons and everything else, but it's so earthy and dirty and you feel the sand under your feet when you're walking around in that show. It doesn't feel like it's all just people staring at green screen and earthiness to it. And I think a lot of that is because they shoot on location And now I'm going to digress one more time. And, you talk about how much people like, for example, the Star Wars shows, even the Mandalorian, which is all shot in the volume in these screens, these very high definition screens. And it's very cool technology because you can basically put people anywhere they want to be. Pretty cool stuff. But there's something that's still not tactile there, as opposed to Andor, which I'm watching right now. And Andor, which is shot on location, it just feels realer because it's shot on an actual location. This is not rocket science, people.
I love Andor.
Don't be so in love with your special effects.
I love it. That is such a great. We can't digress too much, and I haven't seen the whole thing.
Yeah.
But my gosh, I agree.
And one more teaser here that I will be having a conversation about Andor later this week. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That'll be a bonus episode at somewhere along the line. So many bonus episodes I want to get out, but I guess we will just work through them a little at a time. All right. So with this episode, like I said, I broke down the plots earlier. I found that a lot of this was pretty funny, unintentionally, I think, oftentimes in this episode. But let's work our way from the back and then forward, because I think we'll touch most of the things there. So, of course, the really meaty stuff, those last few scenes. First of all, the very last scene, here we have the king misidentifying Alicent as Rhaena. He's going back saying, hey, let's wrap up that conversation about the prophecy, okay, Rhaenyra? And Alicent's like, huh? What was that? Aegon, okay. Aegon's going to be the next king. So she's getting a little bit of this wrong. Then again, his head is all foggy. He's like literally moments away from dying.
But I feel like she's doing it on purpose too, because if a demented man was dying and telling me something and not really addressing me directly, I would know that he was sending a message, but I would question if it was to me. And she is not doing that. She's like, oh, yeah, he said the word Aegon. Okay, wait, what about Aegon? Oh, yeah, that fits. That's a great fit to, my plan that I have going on. I'm going to go with that.
What I would say to that is that she's definitely hearing what she wants to hear, but at the same time, she has no idea about the prophecy. So she's hearing Aegon. Aegon is their oldest son, so he would be the next in line. He's not saying this is addressed to Rhaenyra. He's just saying literally, he's looking at her and saying, this is in your hands. You need to do this. And he's talking about Aegon. And once again, some of the things he says doesn't make sense in that context. But I mean, half the stuff he says doesn't make sense anyway. He's mumbling this whole entire episode. Don't get me wrong. I agree that she's hearing what she wants to hear. But at the same time, I don't think she's doing it maliciously. I think she honestly believes that's what he's saying.
Well, we'll see, because she might have been a little excited to get this perfect fitting information to her plan, Well, it's like, wow. So I wonder, but I could be projecting, because if that was me, I'd be like, was he talking to me? Wait a second. I think he said this and that. Isn't that great for me? I'm like, well, I mean, he did say that. Like, I would be acting like that if I was her. So I don't know how innocent she's being. I'd be doing it intentionally.
Well, I think she's still a little torn here. And I would say that we have to wait and see how the next episode plays out. Because I can imagine definitely in the next episode, we can see a scene where she's with Otto explaining this to him. And she can even say he was out of his mind. He was dying, and Otto's like, what are you talking about? Just do it. What are you going to do? You got to hand this over to Rhaenyra and hope she's going to be nice to you after you've literally openly called her kids bastards. She may not be your best friend,
but Otto would know. Otto would be like, who knows if he was even talking to her.
It's a convenient thing to believe. And it's also what they probably want to believe. And definitely what Otto wants to hear. Right. So.
Yes.
All the worst things about Viserys right there. But we also get to see him at his best, right? Like that previous scene, I got to say that he is encapsulating all his strength as a peacemaker, right? He's using his personal biography. He's using that family lineage. He's using his naivete that everything can be just good, man, kumbaya. I think that might be an act that he's putting on to some extent, because that's how he gets people to do what he wants them to do. So I think we see that he can manipulate people with that earnestness. And I think you see it at its best. Like I said, then you see it at his worst when he's just like, oh yeah, mumble, mumble, mumble. He blows up the whole entire kingdom after like struggling so hard to keep it together,
Poor thing, though. Like,
what a mess.
He walked in with no eye
yes.
and a crown, like chafing his head. It was a poor man. like with a cane and one arm.
He's a drama queen right there. He's like really playing it up. I mean, they could have carried him up there, but
That
he's
was
just like, I'm going to walk the whole.
crazy.
Oh my God, I was laughing so hard. It was crazy. But
I
then it
can
gets kind of
do
sweet.
it.
It's kind of sweet when Damon tries to help him out,
You know, I don't even know if Damon could stand watching this anymore.
Yeah.
Like that, I'm projecting, but like if this was happening in my world, I'd be like, I'm gonna help you. Just let me. Can't watch this.
Right.
But it's still sweet.
By the way, at that dinner, there really seems to be a reconciliation. There seems to be a cooling between Rhaenyra and Alicent, but it all goes wrong because of this toxicity among the younger siblings. And what a mess all of they are, right? So we've jumped ahead 6 years now, and we see that Aegon, who's still like womanizing, like rapes this, their maid basically, and nanny as well. And then someone's got to get the kids dressed now. And turns out he's married to his sister. That whole thing did play out from last week, right? And they have kids. Those kids are going to be pretty messed up for many, many reasons.
That is so weird.
It is
and
so
the
weird.
sister, I started listening to everything she says after we talked about this. She says some pretty crazy stuff.
She's like, beware the beast beneath the boards, right? So I don't know what that means. But.
Yeah, and then she also said, it's not so bad. He'll mainly ignore you, except
right.
sometimes when he's drunk.
Exactly. Well,
so
that's a brutally
that's
honest,
nice
dissection of their marriage, right?
Well, I think she was predicting the marriages that were all set up on this episode.
I don't think that's a prediction. I think she's talking about her marriage to Aegon, right? That basically every once in a while when he's drunk, he has sex with her, and that's how they have these kids, right?
That is so disturbing.
I think that was not a prediction. That was just her talking. Don't worry, when you get married, he'll pretty much ignore you, except every once in a while when he's drunk. I think she's just being honest about her own marriage.
And did you see her dancing?
Yes.
She dances like a 2-year-old.
I think
she's like hop, hop, hop. No, I think he was trying to, help her out, like play along with her dance. That was a great dance.
At that same dinner, you see a little of this needling between these siblings, but they still seem to be like kind of playing, like, I'm going to be the next king, but don't worry, you'll have your time, kind of trying to play somewhat, a little nasty, a little bit nice. But then the boar gets brought out and they're all snickering like, ha, ha, ha. Remember that thing we did, that pig with Aemond? They really should not be messing with Aemond, by the way.
No, what is wrong with them?
And then Aemond starts calling those strong boys, those strong boys. And which of course
he's calling them like weak.
No, he's calling them strong because their dad is strong. Remember, that's his last name.
Oh, that's hilarious. Why?
Have you ever seen these boys?
Oh my God, this is so funny. You know what I was thinking? No, well, I was also doing a few other things at the time to excuse my stupidity here. But basically, when they were doing that, I was like, oh no, now the kids are going to start fighting. Oh, what? They're not strong because they don't play with swords all day. Like I was like, that's not nice. That's way smarter.
The reason everybody in the room, think about it, everybody in the room is just like, don't do it. They know exactly the next word that's going to come out of his mouth, right? So
it's funny though that it could go both ways.
Yeah, well, that's the intention, I think, there.
I love it.
It's so funny how these names work on this. Like, like for example, Laris. And then you think about people who have been conniving on the show. You have Littlefinger and you have Varys, and you take the L and you stick it on Varys and you say Laris, right? Like that's kind of the naming structure here on the show. And it's so funny. You have Aemond, right? So it's Damon, right? So it's like Aemond,
like a game.
Exactly. So Aemond is like serious Damon energy, right? At the end of that episode, the mini Damon, or maybe not mini, because I think he's maybe taller than Damon at this point. He's like taller than everybody. He's also a good fighter, right? Can best Sir Kristen on the battlefield.
Oh yeah, he was great.
So yeah, I mean, losing an eye, not such a bad trade-off for everything else, and he looks good with the eye patch. So hey.
Oh yeah, that's so great, having one eyeball. Yeah, he's good. He's adapting very well. I don't even think he notices that.
What else happens here? Everybody starts making their case. Interesting that when Rhaenys has a chance to speak up, she ends up siding with Rhaenyra because it's the only play she has, right? With Corlys out of the way, she doesn't have any kind of claim, right? With that, especially if these kids are considered bastards. So the only thing she can really do is align herself with Rhaenyra. And Rhaenyra has said that they can marry off the cousins, which of course then puts her in a pretty strong position, right? Because like now her grandkids will be king someday, right? Or queen.
And also, not to veer way off, because it's still the same kind of scene, she is going to have kids with Damon. He has to kill his stepkids at this point. So Damon has to kill his stepkids because his kid's like a triple Valerian. And then on top of that, there's the weird correlation where the bully kids with the dragons and stuff, and the ones who are masturbating out window, like the rapey one, they are brothers to Rhaenyra.
Oh yeah.
Like, it's weird. Like, when I think really hard about, like, these are her brothers, it's not just the queen's kids. The physics of this is fascinating to me. I'm like, and then her kids are the same exact age, but those are their uncles.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of all that, how about when she's meeting with her dad and she's basically telling her dad that you need to speak up for me. I thought I wanted this. I don't think I want this anymore. And now my life's on the line. Dad, you got to do something to help me out. And he says, my only child. He's just negating the whole rest of everybody else who came after. My only child.
Exactly. It's such an interesting combination because they're all inbred in some way. This is why we need like diagrams and stuff. Yeah. Game of Thrones had all those little maps with diagrams. That's what it's like with the kids here. Well, they're cousins, but they're uncles, but they're also like a brother of a grandson, you know?
They're all intermingled.
They're all intermingled.
They are. They're really intermingling now. It's like making a cocktail.
Break it down.
It's like making a cocktail.
Yep.
A DNA cocktail. With very few ingredients.
Oh my gosh. Sounds great.
And then of course we have Vaemond, Corlys's brother, who wants the claim to the Driftwood throne. You know, he says, hey, look, I'm a Valerian. These people are not Valerians. just stating the obvious again. And
of course, clearly.
And when he loses the case, he tries to pussyfoot around the issue, trying to call it out without calling it out. But when he loses that case, he decides to make his case out loud, calling them bastards, calling her a whore.
And Rhaenyra is a whore.
A whore, yes.
Ugh.
And of course, that gets his head chopped off. I loved Damon, by the way, being like, say it. Just wants to hear the word so he could do the deed. Goodbye, Vaemond. We barely knew thee. Truly, I don't really know this character at all. I did find it. Didn't you find it weird that they kind of skipped the whole like Aegon is now married to his sister and had kids? Like again, I feel like there are big things that must have happened here in the middle. They just got to skip. You know, it's kind of weird where they're deciding to split the story up.
Like I can't think about Aegon with his sister. Ugh, so awful. They're so crazy together too.
Speaking of Aegon, I think that a really interesting scene in this whole thing is Alicent dealing with, talking to this girl, having empathy for her, but doing the expected thing in protecting her family by, paying her off basically and threatening her reputation if she does speak out. And then, of course, her reaction with her son afterwards, like smacking him around and calling him no son of mine anymore, right? So
I thought Alicent was just going to have her killed because I'm projecting again. I'd be like, okay, look, this girl is not very bright because she can't count. She said she didn't tell anybody, but then she told all these people and then she told me. And she's really, really emotional. Like she's not able to keep her cool. She's going to melt down. And so I have to kill her. She didn't do that. She paid her off.
That's true. But on the other hand, remember that if this girl ends up dead, for example, then she has told other people, other girls have also been sexually assaulted. It's like a Harvey Weinstein situation here. Other women have had similar stories and they've probably been paid off too and been kept quiet. If all these girls just ended up dead, then, we see it working. That spy network is always working. All of those people who work in there are, spying and selling their secrets to the White Worm. All of that would leak out. So, and it doesn't matter because they're king, queen, whatever. But remember, now she's going to try to make a power play to take away the crown from who has been, openly just the same day. Her dad just basically made a proclamation, her king, I should say, made a proclamation that Rhaenyra is still the queen to be, right? This woman's trying to make a move here. And all of a sudden it's like, by the way, she kills all her workers after her son rapes them, right? Like that's not going to make her very popular when, the war starts breaking out and people have to pick sides.
Yeah, but at the same time, she's the queen. This girl means nothing to her, nothing at all. I don't even know if it's empathy. She looked like, oh no, this is awful. This thing is, this person cannot keep it together. And this guy had to rape her. He had to rape her. Like, what a pain in the ass my kid is. I have to go now pay this girl off. I have to threaten her. I have to then go tell him, like, he's not my son anymore. I don't think she was like, poor thing.
I think she does have empathy for her. I mean, she's annoyed by this situation, of course, because it's probably happened many times. That I do think that she really does have these religious beliefs. And I think that is something else that's really chafing against her having to make all these moral compromises because, you see her praying with Rhaenyra back when her mom died. And Rhaenyra, obviously, this is like the Targaryens believe that they're gods. This is like the whole mythology of the show. The Targaryens believe that they're gods. They really don't believe in the gods. It's like the Roman Empire where they kind of let in Christianity. They're like, okay, we'll let Christianity in because if we don't, these, zealots are going to like overthrow our government or our control of the people. So we'll say everybody's Catholic, but we really don't believe any of that stuff, right? We're still pagans. And but they kind of played along to keep people happy. The High Towers are real believers, right? They like put like these 7-pointed stars everywhere. And by the way, that 7-pointed star decoration of King's Landing is what we see in Game of Thrones, the Game of Thrones show, right? So this is like kind of the beginning of that turn where the kind of the religion is more open in the society, I think. But I do think that she's a believer, right? She actually does have these beliefs. So I do think she feels bad about doing these things, but power has corrupted her, right? She has to do the things that keep her in power as well, right? So that's just how it is. Anything else you have about this episode, or maybe a general opinion of it? My complaint on this show, I have not felt this way at all. I've defended the show this whole entire time. And now I kind of am buying in at some of the criticisms I heard. Critics get to see a lot more of these episodes. I think they saw up until this episode before the show even premiered, they saw like the first 8 episodes. So I do kind of see that now with these time jumps, it is starting to feel a little soap opera to me, right? Because we have less and less connection to these people. We just see them like 10 years later and then something crazy is happening. And it does start feeling a little soapy. But I do hope that we have less of these jumps in time. But in general, I thought this was a really good scene. I thought the dinner scene was great. One of the best episodes in the show. And overall, I was entertained. What did you think?
I don't mind the last time jump. They all separated at that time. They went and did their own thing. They already have these relationships that we're seeing 6 years later. So I'm okay with assuming a lot of stuff in this way, as opposed to when they had the last time jump before this, where I didn't get to see any of these relationships even begin to evolve.
Right.
I didn't mind this last time jump at all.
I agree that this time jump was less of a nuisance to me than the previous one. But I think it's just like, just the fact that we just had a time jump 2 episodes ago, and now we got another one. I hope they don't continue to make these big time jumps. I hope they do start to settle in a story. And I'm guessing, honestly, that by the time we get to the end of this season, we're going to be at like full out war. And maybe this whole season ends up being like setting the stage for the next season and the ones beyond that, I assume. But that all remains to be seen, I guess. But I don't really want them to just keep like jumping 10 years if that's going to be the case. But that's probably not what they're going to do. I just, hope it's not the case. Just leave it at that.
I see what you're saying. Overall, I loved this whole episode. It was great. It was magical.
Magical.
I loved it. I was like, oh, I love this show. It's so beautiful. And I love this very play-like way. We've talked about this before, that they have putting this all together. And it sometimes feels like Shakespeare. It's great.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.